Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second EWS webinar, EWS 201, Systems and Structures that Support Early Warning Systems and Implementation. Today we have an interactive session for you. So as we go through this, please put your questions in the question and answer box. Any technical questions that you have, please place in the chat section. At this point, I'm going to turn it off to Ginny Scala, who will kick us off. Ginny?
Great, thanks, Sarah. So welcome again to everyone for attending this webinar, which is part of the Learning Series on Early Warning Systems, which is supported by the Regional Education Laboratory System and IES. I'm Jenny Scala, and with me today are experienced researchers and practitioners who will share their ideas and stories on implementing early warning systems. The Regional Education Laboratories, or RELs, work in partnership with school districts, state departments of education, and others to use data and research to improve academic outcomes for students. Fundamentally, the mission of the RELs is to provide support for a more evidence-reliant education system. As Sarah said, this webinar is part of the REL Learning Series that's focused on early warning system. The first webinar of this series took place on February 25th, and there are recordings that are available on multiple REL websites. And this webinar provided a brief overview of early warning systems. Beyond today's event, there are multiple opportunities to learn more about various aspects of early warning systems throughout the remainder of 2016. Some of the upcoming webinar topics are listed on your screen. For more information on any of these early warning system events, as part of this learning series, you'll find more information on the IES website. You can also sign up to receive the news flash that's published by IES to learn more and to find out when additional webinars will be happening or when webinar recordings are posted. Today's webinar is going to be focusing on 2 of the 5 key areas of early warning system implementation. And Sarah's going to give a brief overview of those later on, but really today we're going to be focused at building a team and mapping interventions to early warning indicators. We'll also highlight areas where you may be able to leverage the existing teams that you already have to support your early warning system work, specifically connecting early warning systems to multi-tiered framework systems. We have polls and other ways for you to engage with us throughout today's webinar, and we look forward to that happening. Before we dig deeper into today's content, I wanted to take just a moment to make sure we all have a common understanding of what an early warning system is. An early warning system uses readily available data in schools as in a structured team to proactively identify students who may be struggling and then assign them to interventions so that students get back on track. And in our time today, we're focusing getting students back on track for graduating high school. An early warning system can be a powerful tool to address disparities among student groups and strategically develop supports to help all students graduate on time with their peers. Our next presenter is going to be Sarah Frizzell, and she is a senior advisor with REL Northwest, where she leads the Montana Data Use Alliance, which provides analytical and targeted technical assistance on data quality and dropout prevention. She also helps coordinate and share information between all of the RELs as part of the REL Northwest lead of the cross-REL collaboration. Frizzell has led REL Northwest work on early warning systems implementation in Montana, Oregon, and Washington State. She co-authored a practitioner's guide to implementing early warning systems and also an article that was published in the July 2013 issue of the Principles Research Review called Implementing Early Warning Systems.
Thank you, Ginny. If you want more information on implementing early warning systems after this webinar, we have provided a couple of resources for your use. The American Institutes for Research produced the first implementation guide in 2013. The guide includes a 7-step process that guides users in making informed decisions about how to support at-risk students and continue to monitor their progress over time. We are lucky today to have Ginny Scala, one of the authors of this guide, provide more information about implementation. Another resource is a practitioner's guide to implementing early warning systems, developed by REL Northwest and published in 2015. The guide is based on a national scan of literature describing successful strategies for implementation by early warning system teams across the United States. The guide is divided into 5 main sections. The first section is establishing teams. Indicators and reports are separate sections in the guide. The fourth section is linking indicators with those interventions, and the fifth is evaluating the interventions. A brief overview was given in the first Early Warning System webinar, EWS 101, and we encourage you to look up that and watch that if you need more information on each of those sections. Today we're going to be doing a deeper dive, though, in team building and linking interventions to indicators. As an overview, the goals of an early warning system team is to help teams develop and identify the team members, define roles and responsibilities for each of those team members, define appropriate goals for the early warning system initiative, understand the basics of valid indicators, and provide professional development for using the system. The second and third sections cover information on how to assess whether the indicators you've chosen are valid and what types of reports are appropriate for different audiences. For example, administrators are most likely looking for trends in the school rather than individual student data, whereas a school-based team is going to need to know each student's current and previous data to make decisions about how to best support them. When thinking about effective indicators, we want to make sure that four things are true. We want to make sure that they're valid for their intended purpose, that they're actionable by schools, that they're meaningful and easily understood, and finally that they're aligned with the school and district priorities. When thinking about reports, there's two primary focus actions. You'll need to compile data that identifies student progress towards graduation, and also alert staff when the data indicate a student is falling off track. Pay close attention to the validity and thresholds. The audience and also the audience for the reports. Be careful not to disseminate student information that would violate FERPA or HIPAA laws. And finally, you'll also want to address the regularity of producing reports. How often would it be reasonable? For example, if you have attendance data, those reports might be able to be updated on a more frequent basis than something like course grades, which might be coming out every quarter or semester. The fourth section of the guide discusses the importance of being intentional about linking the available interventions in the school to why students are struggling. We'll talk more in depth about this, but in general, we want to ensure that there are enough supports in the school to help the number of struggling students we have. The last section covers the importance of recording information on interventions, such as which students attend each intervention, how often they participate, and their beginning and ending student performance scores, so that you can look at trends in student progress in the individual interventions over time. Our next presenter is Jason Harlacher, a senior researcher with REL Central at Marzano Research. With REL Central, he focuses on tiered frameworks and assisting school teams with using data to make decisions. He has previously worked as a school psychologist, a district coach for multi-tiered systems of support, and as a state-level consultant for positive behavioral interventions and supports in response to interventions. He presents nationally on tiered frameworks and has authored several books, including Designing Effective Classroom Management and Practitioner's Guide to Curriculum-Based Evaluation. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Jason.
Great, thank you for that introduction. I'm going to spend some time discussing teams and the roles on those teams. So first I want to say within a school there can be a few teams related to tiered frameworks and to using data to match students to interventions. So we wanted to share what may be common roles between those different teams. We're not advocating for a particular team or one way or another to organize a team. That will depend on contextual factors such as the size of the school and other initiatives going on, but we wanted to share the common roles among those teams so everyone can see how they relate to each other. So let's begin first by looking at this picture. What do you see here besides a tiger? I'll give you a few seconds. This picture has the phrase, the hidden tiger within the stripes on the tiger. So see if you can see those words in there. Some of you may have seen it, some may not, but if you look closely, perhaps you'll see it. And that picture illustrates the purpose of a team-based approach, and so that's the first lesson with teams. We use a team-based approach because we all view things from a slightly different perspective, and that can help us when we're looking at data and analyzing things. We all have different views and theories about why students learn, so when we come together as a team, we can pull all of that experience and knowledge together so that we look at issues from all sorts of angles. That's the first reason why we use a team-based approach. 2, it increases sustainability. I'm sure we can all relate to a situation where we're in a school and one person led an initiative and did a great job, but then that person leaves the school. The initiative likely fades out or goes with them. So a team helps ensure sustainability because the team owns the initiative, not just one person. And then there's a division of labor. With multiple people on the team, you have multiple people to complete a task and makes the list of action items more efficient to complete. So I'll share specific roles next, but you'll first want to ask what sort of personnel in the school should be on the team. Well, the team will need to accomplish and do several things that we have listed above, which includes having the authority to make certain decisions, having knowledge of the diversity of the student population, and knowing the range of interventions available for students. You'll need data expertise on the team, as you want members who can both interpret the data as well as navigate the early warning system tool and student information system. And ideally, you'd have district representation. This is helpful because you can have more systemic support with district representation, as well as knowledge of district-wide practices that may be accessible. I want to point out that not having district representation isn't a deal breaker. You can begin early warning systems or any of the tiered frameworks without district support, but it does make life easier if you have district representation. As for the exact staff, it'll vary, but certainly specialized staff such as the school counselor, the school psych, a special education teacher, and leadership staff such as the principal, vice principals, and program coordinators are all good candidates. But you don't necessarily assume that all of these people have to be on the team. Instead, it's about ensuring that the team can achieve the bulleted list we have on that slide. So let me share 5 roles that make sense to have on a team. 1, you'll have the team facilitator or team leader. The main role of this person is to set the agenda and then lead the team through the agenda. This person really runs the meeting and keeps the conversation on track. Then we have the timekeeper. This person monitors the time allotted for each agenda item. So he or she will set a timer and prompt people when time is coming to an end. It helps if this person is a little more assertive with saying time's up, and this person can be the same person as the team facilitator. It doesn't have to necessarily be a separate person. Third is the minutes recorder, whose main role is to take notes during the meeting. This person will record the decisions made during the meeting and document the key moments from the meeting. 2 things here. 1, they document decisions made, not necessarily everything discussed. So the minutes should be brief and succinct so they're easy and quick to read. So the minutes recorder will record decisions made and not everything mentioned or discussed. And then 2, it's important that the minutes are sent out within 24 hours of the end of the meeting so that people know what was decided, and so they have a list of the action items of what needs to be done. The team should leave with an understanding of who needs to know what information, which helps respect student privacy. Then we have the data manager, whose role is to organize the data prior to the meeting. This person should be skilled with the data management system, but this person will also look at the data beforehand, interpret it quickly, and then pull other data up that may be needed. When the team looks at certain data during the meeting, it may trigger a question to ask, which then requires other data to look at. So it's helpful if the data person can anticipate questions or hypotheses that the team may have, and then have that data ready beforehand. So for example, if the data person looks at office referral data and identifies that 3 students may need interventions, the team may ask the students' grades or how many students are in a current intervention. The data person could pull that data beforehand and have it ready during the meeting. And then finally, we have local administration, which is obviously the leadership at the school. Their role is really twofold. This person can provide approval for certain decisions made, and then their presence at the meeting signifies the importance and commitment to early warning systems and tiered frameworks. Without leadership, the team can only go so far before they need leadership to approve of certain decisions or provide certain input that only they can provide. Also, it's helpful if district administration can attend, even if it's only once a quarter. For example, a district representative in one district may attend once a quarter and provide the teams an early warning system report of students and their risk status. This creates consistency among the schools and lessens the burden on the schools because they don't have to actually crunch the numbers. Even if the district person doesn't provide a report, they can still attend and show support and be aware of the process within the school. So there's a summary slide of all the different roles. I think the key issue is, we want a team that's sustainable, and there will be days when people are absent or other things happen. So having a backup person available to fill that role so that the different functions and roles of the team don't get left behind. Okay, so then we're going to do another poll here, 2 questions this time. So on your right, you'll see 2 questions. First, in thinking of your team or teams at your sites, which roles do your teams currently support? And so you can mark all that apply there. Then in thinking of the purpose of the team, what knowledge areas can your team currently support? So we'll give you a little bit of time there to respond. Okay. Sarah, can you reveal the results? There we go. Okay, so we'll look at which roles do your teams currently support. So team facilitator and school administration. So that's good. Having a school administration, really, you need that buy-in and support, and that really starts at the top. I know for myself, we had one team that I was on, we had issues with leadership attending, and so we had a conversation with them, and the issue was they would get called out a lot during the meeting, and so we set a rule where we would meet in the conference room and no one could interrupt during that time save for an emergency. Looks like the lowest 2 are a timekeeper and district administrator. For timekeeper, I think solutions are around just giving someone an actual stopwatch or a kitchen timer and using that to keep track of the time, setting a certain amount for each agenda item. And then for the second question, which of these knowledge areas can your team currently support? So understanding the diverse student body is the highest, available interventions, and then available early warning system tool and student information system. I think with the lowest one there is C, the available early warning system tool. Again, we'll cover some of that with these different early warning system webinars that we have planned. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for the responses there. Just a couple more things, and then I'll introduce our next speaker. I just wanted to touch on some of the systems that are needed to make early warning systems successful. It can be easy to get caught up on non-essential agenda items or side conversations. So the team has to really make a conscious effort to stay focused on the problem at hand. I think this is where the team leader plays a big role with keeping the team on track, as well as the person keeping time. Documenting the action steps or the next steps is key. So using a minute sheet and having it sent out within 24 hours of the meeting's end is important. This ties into communication, as communicating to the necessary parties is obviously important. So with the minutes recorder, they'll really want to document what information needs shared, who needs that information, and when and how it will be shared. So with communicating that information, also keep in mind that we don't want to inadvertently create negative stereotypes for students who are flagged for more support, and that the way we communicate needs to be framed as support, not that this student is a bad kid, so to speak. And then this can lead into the student privacy piece as well. Other than those on the team, only those who would need to know in order to help the student should really receive the information. So we really want to respect privacy and confidentiality as much as we can. The team might think of a broader communication message to the whole school body so that the students, families, and teachers really see the system as support and that everyone needs support from time to time. It's not necessarily, doesn't necessarily mean that students are going to fail, but if they continue these types of patterns, the risk of not succeeding increases. And there was a question about what is the best thing to remember about forming effective teams. In my experience, it's really been buy-in and having a vision. So getting people together and first establishing what is our vision for using an early warning system, or our vision for using a tiered framework, and what do we want to accomplish. And then getting buy-in from the school and the staff to really understand what the purpose is. And I think a helpful way to get buy-in is to survey the staff, collect some data on their perceptions, share your data on attendance and behavior and grades, and then just have a conversation as a staff about the data and see what story the data tells you. So I'm sure other presenters today will share information as well about what makes an effective team. Okay, well, it's my pleasure to now introduce our next presenter. Our next presenter is Heidi Matthew-Mucha, who is employed by the University of Utah. She is the Utah MTSS Grant Evaluator for the Utah State Office of Education, where she works with teams at the state, district, and school level. And previously, she has worked as a school psychologist and a coach for both PBIS and RTI. Looks like you're already the presenter. Heidi?
Yes, great, thank you. Well, thanks everyone. I'm excited about this opportunity to just share a couple of thoughts today about some of the teaming structures that we have in Utah and just the experience that I've had on what makes a successful team. So as Jason mentioned, in Utah we have a long history of working with initiatives that involve teams. So since I've been involved at the state level, and at first I was in a school as a school psychologist, and I was the building facilitator, and then a couple of years later I became a district coach, and a couple of years after that became a state coach. So in the 13 years that I've been doing this, I've seen the teaming structures in Utah go from a PBS-specific initiative to a response intervention initiative, and now we're working on multi-tiered system of support. And that's where I spend the bulk of my time coaching schools and districts on effective teams and how to get those systems in place. So this graphic just describes or just points out the levels of teams, as was mentioned in my introduction. The yellow would be our state level teams, the green are our district level teams, and the blue would show our building level teams. And we found that having effective and efficient teams at each of those levels for us has really increased our level of implementation with high fidelity and has really helped us to sustain some of those best practices that, that we've been talking about. So one of the things that we do when we first start consulting at a school or district level, we really want to make sure that they understand the importance of teams. And, you know, we know that our educational system is a complex organization. There's lots of problems to solve, and that we do have to work as a team, bringing our strengths together at the table. But this is one tool that we found a couple of years ago, and I found it really helpful as sort of a kickoff activity when we're first starting to build some of those teams. So it's a TED Talk from 2012 from Atul Gawande, and perhaps some of you have listened or read some of his things, but I want to share just a couple of thoughts from this TED Talk, and the first one is here on the slide. So he says, we're all specialists now, even the primary care physicians. We've trained, hired, and rewarded people to be cowboys, but it's pit crews that we need, pit crews for patients. And in his TED Talk, he also relates this information to educational settings, but how I usually kick it off is I'll ask folks to list some characteristics of a cowboy. And I'll often get things like a lone ranger or hard worker, really independent. And then I ask for characteristics of a pit crew. and we talk about teamwork. Everyone has a job. Everyone has to come together in a really timely fashion. And that, for me, is a nice place to set the stage for the importance of teaming and all coming together, that perhaps you do have a lot of expertise, but we really, in our system, need to work more like a pit crew and less like a cowboy. So Atul Gawande also said in the TED Talk, making systems work is the great task of my generation of physicians and scientists. But I would go further and say that making systems work, whether in healthcare or education, making a pathway out of poverty is the great task of our generation as a whole. And he also said, having great components is not enough, yet we've been obsessed with great components. We want the best drugs, the best technologies, the best specialists, but we don't think too much about how it all comes together. And I think that that's the point that we tend to focus on. How can we make this all come together? Well, the best place to do that is by having an effective team. And I want to share just a couple of thoughts about what I've seen, the characteristics that make an effective team. And Jason and Sarah have sort of touched on some of these, but I'll perhaps give just a couple of specific examples. So the first bullet here would be aligning teams or initiatives. So as Jason mentioned with the poll, there were a couple of different types of teams often in schools, and we find that as well when we go into teams. Often if a new initiative comes in, there's going to be a variety of teams trying to problem solve around that initiative. So one activity that we like to do, and on this next slide, we do what we call a teaming matrix. So we borrowed this from PBS. I know a lot of different state organizations will use some variety of this, and you could create it and make it your own. But basically what you need to do is define the teams already existing in the school, the team members, what the intended outcomes are of that particular team, and then potential data sources. And I've also seen some matrices that would perhaps add an additional column like a feedback loop or something like that. So you could make it your own. We did this at the state level, and our matrix ended up being, I think we were at 36 pages. So it was a lot, but our point was to try to align some of those teams with similar outcomes. Because what we want to have happen when we have effective teams in place, we don't want them to have to compete with other initiatives. So it's a good activity for administration to buy in and say, okay, here are our priorities, and here's how we're going to make sure that they are effective. Okay,
right,
so once we, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go on, Heidi, I'm sorry.
Oh. So once we've aligned our teams, we need to make sure that we have effective team training. So one of the things that we do professional development with our teams to make sure that everybody's on the same page with effective teams and what that looks like. We choose to use TIPS, which is team-initiated problem solving, and you can find all that information on the PBS Technical Assistance Center website. Those are the roles that Jason just articulated, those also come out of TIPS. So that's how we train our teams. That helps us, just like you talked about, get the roles and responsibilities, and make sure that that's the place that we start. We make sure that our teams have effective representation, and the next part, that they are using problem solving. So I think that that's easier said than done, actually. I've found in many of my teams, when I was participating as a school psychologist, we would admire the problem the entire meeting and never get through the other stages of the problem-solving process. So one of the things that we've tried to do is really help our teams work through the entire process rather than just sit and try to decide why it's happening. So we would create flipbooks or other tools, a graphic organizer, so that teams could really see themselves moving through the problem-solving process and have someone, the facilitator, make sure that they weren't just staying on one of the questions in the problem-solving process. One of the other pieces that I think is critical for an effective team is make sure that you establish those meeting norms. So when are you going to meet? How often? Make sure that you're not interrupted. Some of those things that Jason talked about. I found in secondary settings particularly that is really, really difficult because a lot of the staff members are going in a variety of directions, particularly after school because of extracurricular activities that they support. So for our high schools, we found mornings tend to be better for them, but that would be site-specific. So we just need to say, we need to figure out where 80% of our team members need to be attending very regularly. What does that look like? Is there already an existing team that has some type of norm that they can meet regularly, and could we learn from them? One of the other important pieces is to make sure that everyone on the team understands the purpose and the outcomes of the team, that we communicate with the other teams or levels in our building, that we have those established. I'm going to talk about feedback loops in just a second. So we have good morale on our team. And one of my favorites that one of our schools came up with, they would say, have the meeting at the meeting. So they have that as a norm. If questions or items came up, they wouldn't discuss those in the faculty lounge or other places because it left people out. If you need to say something, say it at the meeting, and let's make sure that we all work together to solve the problem. I actually thought that was really helpful. And that last point right there under effective team training is data that tells a story. Jason talked about having the data analyst on the team, and that's such a critical role. The TIPS training prompted us that we shouldn't just bring the data and sit there and expect everyone to analyze it with us, but that data person should come ready to tell a story. That's really helped us with our teams because, one, it saves time. They're ready to jump in and discuss the trends and get feedback, but we're not waiting for 15 or 20 minutes for everyone to interpret, to grasp their data that's in front of them. So we found that to be helpful. And one of the reasons we have found that a lot of our settings are data rich, but information poor. So they're gathering so much information, they're having a very difficult time mining through the important indicators. So I think once your team has established what are our effective indicators and what are we looking at, how often do we need to share that information, and have that person really understand that they need to jump in with the story so that the team will be able to problem solve. And the last couple, accountability, that's a critical one for us. We do fidelity checks pretty often. Again, with that TIPS system, they provide a fidelity checklist. We require that an outside coach come in and do at least quarterly a fidelity check on effective teaming and share that information back with their team. But it's something that they could do at each meeting. They don't have to wait for an outside coach to come in. We spend a lot of time coaching in our state with our district level coaches, with our school level coaches, to make sure that we're offering that accountability and support, which also sort of leads into that feedback. We have our coaches give feedback pretty formally. We do a feedback form each time to the team that we meet with. And I'm happy to share that form if folks are interested, but basically it is a form that has 3 things that went well with each team meeting and 1 item that they can improve for the next meeting. And then we share that form back with them every time that we meet, whether that's monthly or quarterly, depending on the level of teams that we're working with. But we found that to be really helpful and continue to build a relationship with effective teams. And that last item I just want to touch on for a minute, the systems approach for sustainability. When I first started working with this project, we worked largely as a state team to individual school teams. And what we found, we definitely had islands of excellence across our state in elementary and secondary settings. But anytime there was a change, an administrator change, or things in the district had changed, we found that they needed the PD, the professional development, all over again. So as we approached the last few years with MTSS, with our multi-tier system of support, it was critical for us to talk about sustainability and a systems approach. So how are we going to make sure that all of the schools in our district or in our region are implementing these good practices? So if an administrator leaves or there's other changes, we don't have to start from scratch, but it's just the way we do business. So that's been really helpful for us. And we have really leaned a lot on the National Implementation Research Network, or NERN, for their information on stages of implementation and creating roadmaps and practice profiles and what that looks like so that we can build that institutional memory so that we don't see so much turnover with those natural changes that you're just going to see because we work in educational systems with complex change. So I think that is all I wanted to share with you. So I think, Sarah, I can...
Yes, thank you so much, Heidi. I really appreciate hearing all of those stories from when you've been out in the schools, and it's very interesting to hear how all of this works out. And so at this point, I do want to go ahead and take a few minutes here to answer any questions that have come in. I know that I've got one pulled up right now. And Jenny, I'm going to ask you to answer this first one at least, and then we'll see if there's others that come up. But what kind of data analysis does the data manager do before coming to the meeting? Or is the data analyst a team activity? Analysis
Yep.
a team activity?
This is a great question. And so there's a combination of it depends on what's being done and what the topic for the EWS team is during that meeting. The data manager, though, beforehand can, depending on what tool you're using for early warning systems, it's going to match your early warning indicators to your students and your student performance and student attendance and behavior information. All those queries need to be run so that there are reports that people can look at to help make database decisions and inform that conversation. It could be that that's the type of work that's done beforehand, and then when the team is together, that digging deeper into data to get at that root cause to really kind of figure out what is going on rather than just knowing what the symptom is, but really identifying the cause. That would be done as a group activity. So it's a both and. There's some pre-work that definitely helps streamline that team time and to get out of what Heidi had mentioned of just looking at data and kind of admiring all your data to then get into making the decisions based on what your data are telling you.
Thanks, Jenny. And kind of as a follow-up to that, is there a role for anecdotal data in the meetings?
There can be, and this is something that I'll just briefly touch on now, and I think there are other webinars that are going to be coming up or throughout the year that will talk more about this. So this anecdotal data, you're going to have information that your early warning system tool is going to identify what students are at risk, and those are just symptoms. So really to get deeper into identifying the cause or what's really causing the student to be identified, you're likely going to need other data. And so that can happen depending on your team and the culture. That usually happens in regular intervals. It could be that it's not just looking at individual students, but also groups of students to see if there's a system-wide change that could help really support groups of students to get back on track rather than looking at individual students each time. So it's there's definitely information likely in your tool that will help you get you started, but you'll likely need additional information and data to really dig deeper.
Thank you, Jenny. I do want to talk about one more up here. It says, does this also apply to pre-K and K? And I know that that's a question that a lot of schools that I've worked with, I haven't looked at it. They haven't looked at it specifically at pre-K, so maybe one of our other presenters might be able to talk about that. But I do have a district that I worked with that was looking at it in kindergarten. And what they did was they started that whole entire conversation of the importance of attendance, behavior, and course performance in kindergarten. And so they would run an EWS report for each student in the building, and the teachers were actually using those reports to communicate back with the parents specifically on, okay, so attendance, amazingly, attendance happens to be, the poorest attendance happens to be in kindergarten in most of the schools that I've looked at. So really kind of trying to change that conversation to the parents of like, if your child isn't here in school, it might seem like they can take a few days off, but for a vacation or things like that, but it's really important that they be there to have the information. And so that's the way that I've seen early warning systems play out at least in kindergarten. I'm not sure, Heidi or Sean, do you have any other kind of information seeing it in that way?
Yeah, I've seen it across the board. I think the team level stuff in the more elementary grades, K through 5. What I've seen is more RTI type meeting. So yeah.
Okay, thanks, Sean. And yeah. Heidi, do you have anything to add to that as well?
I haven't seen anything in addition to what you talked about, particularly at the pre-K level. I think some of our schools will start early in kindergarten, and the team will say, here are the things we want to start tracking for school success. I think some of our schools in Utah probably aren't as fluent in using the language of early warning systems. I think they talk more about school success, but for elementary, but particularly when they get into secondary, I think that's where our schools are more attentive to that particular language.
Right. And I would say that that is,
yeah, this is Jenny. I was just going to jump in and just kind of add to that, and this might be what you were going to say, and then I apologize in advance. One of the not concerns, but the cautions about pre-K as it pertains to early warning systems is this notion of we are using indicators and that we have researched and have done kind of statistical aspects of knowing either what percentage a student is at risk at different points or at what point a student becomes at risk for missing key educational milestones. And so this notion with pre-K, often what we're seeing and hearing is that there isn't the consistent enough data as well as really the research to know how would we identify and at what point would we identify different risk percentages. And so that's one of the aspects that we're definitely hearing in pre-K. Given the attention that pre-K is getting in early childhood, I think that might be coming down the pipeline, but right now we don't really have the research to be able to say, here are the indicators and the risk percentages with confidence.
Yep, that's very similar to what I was going to say too, Ginny. So I thank you. You've explained that really great. I think the only other thing to kind of keep in mind is that it's really at a school level decision making if they want to. I have one school that's specifically calling it dropout prevention in kindergarten, but I know that could have negative side effects or stereotypes with those kids, and so I would caution against that as well. And just, as long as what Jason was talking about earlier, the communication plan of how you're going to push this out to the parents, the students, the school in general, and that whole entire community, I think that's really where you start to answer those questions of how you want to frame things. But at this point, I'm going to go ahead and close down the questions. You can continue to put your questions in the question and answer box, and we'll have another couple times to answer questions. But at this point, I want to go ahead and introduce Ginny Scala, who has been talking a little bit, and she opened us up. But just a little background information on Ginny is that she's a senior researcher for the American Institutes for Research, or AIR. She is the project manager of AIR's Early Warning System service line and has been providing technical assistance to educators for over 15 years. Ginny has worked on projects focused on dropout prevention in rural states and districts, as well as in urban districts. She's served as a researcher on multiple regional educational laboratory studies for REL West and REL Northeastern Islands, including early warning systems, indicator validation, developing tools for an EWS, and, of course, implementation. Using her experience, Ginny participates in assisting states, districts, schools, and other parties to create and strategically implement early warning systems. And I'm very happy that she's here with us today again to talk about her experience. And I'm going to make you the presenter next, Ginny, and open this back up to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. So we've talked a little bit today about the teams and the different roles of teams, and that really helps to connect if you've got multiple teams in schools, the way Jason had gone through that poll earlier. And now we're transitioning into saying, okay, one of the questions that we get asked a lot is this notion of how do I and what are appropriate interventions for students once they've been identified. And the identification process happens through a different way, and so we're not going to be talking about that, but this is more of the, all right, what interventions do I have, and what interventions and how should I match my interventions to students as and once students have been identified. And one of the first things in our work that we really recommend is that people first of all take stock and create a catalog or map out what interventions they currently have. And in that process, the 5 steps are on the slide, and we're going to kind of walk through those today quickly, but just to give everyone a common understanding. So that first notion of defining the intervention, oftentimes people might only think about programs as an intervention, but what about maybe people in terms of a school counselor or a resource if there's a clothing closet, or maybe it's a specific strategy that's the intervention rather than a specific program. So getting clarity in terms of understanding how you're defining locally what an intervention is. Then you're going to go about saying, okay, what available interventions do we already have at our school? This is often why we advocate that multiple people be on the team that are knowledgeable about your available interventions. Those common places or groups that you might want to talk to include student support services, special education, maybe you have a college and career ready group, your RTI or PBIS teams, and maybe even specific departments if there have been different areas of focus within your school. So you want to think school-wide, not just specifically within a department or a specific group when you're going about this identification process. Then you want to, in this third step, is really make sure that you understand the purpose of each intervention, and then how does that intervention connect to your early warning indicators of where students are being identified as being at risk. And we're going to walk through that with some sample programs in just a few moments so that everyone has an opportunity to do that with us here today. Along with that, once you've identified how the intervention connects to early warning indicators, you want to make sure that you can then figure out, as we're connecting it to tiered frameworks, which tier is the intervention designed to support. And while with step 3 of the connecting it to an early warning indicator, it could be multiple indicators. With step 4 here, in terms of identifying your intervention tier, a lot of people said that they had RTI or PBIS or some sort of tiered framework team already in place. So those of you will probably know that that means that your tiers are mutually exclusive. So if an intervention is really supporting your tier 1 level, it's not also going to be listed in other categories. And then this final aspect is making sure that you know for each intervention how many students can be supported, because that plays an important role when you start to assign students to intervention. And then know and decide who is responsible for maintaining and tracking the students that had been assigned to it. So if I'm responsible for all the students that are receiving an English language arts support, what does that mean in terms of what data am I collecting, how am I collecting that, who am I reporting back to, and at what points in time, and how many students can I support as part of that intervention? So all of these aspects become really important when you're thinking about creating your own catalog of interventions. Just to make sure that we all have a common understanding of a tiered, multi-tiered framework, this graphic and the information that's on the slide hopefully makes a lot of sense to everyone. This notion of when we talk about tier 1, that's the bottom area of the triangle, and when the triangle is colored, it's the green, yellow, red. So that universal school-wide, the goal is that when a strong universal system is in place, about 80% of the population of your students are going to be served sufficiently with a strong tier 1. We focus first on this, particularly in our work in secondary schools. The schools often skip thinking about strengthening tier 1, and they jump into the targeted and the intensive levels of tier 2 and tier 3. So tier 1 is really still always very important. Your targeted is about 5 to 15% of your population are going to need kind of this targeted approach. And then that intensive is about 5 to 10%. And if you have more questions specifically on this, put them in the Q&A and we'll answer those as we go on. And when we get to the more questions answer, but I'm going to move forward and we can always provide more information and links to where there's more information around tiered frameworks later on if people need it. So when you're working and when we've been working with schools, as I said, it's really important that there's this master list or this catalog of available interventions. And often there isn't. It's really knowledge is rested within specific people in specific departments or specific groups across the school. Particularly becomes more of an issue when we're thinking about secondary levels as well. But by cataloging these interventions by the early warning indicator, by capacity, tiers, then your school and your team and districts can quickly identify gaps in terms of what you might need, what you're providing, as well as to also perhaps see where students might be struggling based off of their need. And so we're going to talk through this just a little bit more. But when we're talking about this matching notion, one way of thinking about it is this notion of kind of supply and demand. So if you are creating your list of interventions and you've got that fully completed, and you can then see how those relate to different early warning indicators. once you run your school level report in your tool, your early warning system tool, you can then see if you have an equal spread. So an example that makes this really kind of understandable and relatable is, so say that you have 100 students that are flagged for attendance, and your current attendance interventions only support 60 students. You don't have an appropriate match between the supply and demand in terms of demand based off of your early warning indicators. You've got 100 students that are flagged for attendance, but your supply is only an intervention that can support 60 students. So again, it's this other way of helping you start to provide appropriate systems and kind of, not just systems, but interventions that are best suited to match the needs of your students, and using data to help inform all of those decisions. And that's really one of the great ways that this notion of early warning systems can connect quite nicely to tiered frameworks, whether it's response to intervention, response to instruction, or PBIS, or some other multi-tiered framework. So this is a way of starting that conversation. This is a sample school-level report, and I'm not going to go into a ton of depth about what's in here today or how we got to this, but this is from sample data. And what we've done with this school-level report, as a school-level report, you're not going to see any identifiable information of specific students. It just gives you broad picture how we're doing. So each column here is a risk, an early warning indicator. And so I'm going to take this and kind of, I think, point right over here. This one right here, I hope everyone can see my arrow. This far left column is the initial attendance absent rate. This column right here is our grading period attendance rate. This middle column is the number of course fails per grading period. Second to right column is for grade point average, GPA. And then behavior indicators are on this far right side. The top portion, this light blue portion, the top portion of the chart, of the bar graph, are the number of students that were flagged based off of this early warning indicator. So for behavior, right here, we had 156 students that were flagged for being at risk for behavior. Whereas down here in this darker, you'll see that there's the number 344. That's 344 students were not flagged for behavior. Okay? So this is sample data, and we do this so that we can start to have a conversation about, all right, how are we going to use our information and our data to help move forward? We're going to take this example and say, all right, this is our school-level report. How are we going to move forward and start to figure out how we assign students to our interventions, and looking at that supply-demand aspect, do we have the appropriate interventions for our students? So with this, we promised that we would have some engaging opportunities for you today, and that's what we're going to do today. So what's going to come next in our slides are each slide will have one intervention, and we have 5 sample interventions, and most of these have actually been pulled from the What Works Clearinghouse website, but not all of them. So first, let me say that these are examples, not exemplars, nor these recommendations. Sarah and I are going to go back and forth and provide a brief summary of the intervention, and then you'll see what just popped up over on your right under the polling question is some information. So let me advance the slide so this lines up. So this first one that we're going to walk through together is Check and Connect. It's a program, intervention program, dropout prevention program. And then I'm going to give a brief summary about Check and Connect, and then everyone is going to have an opportunity to determine which early warning indicators they see or think that Check and Connect applies, as well as which tier of a tiered framework it would also be applicable for. So Check and Connect is a program. This check component is designed to continually monitor student performance and progress. The Connect involves having program giving students individualized attention, and they might be working with other school staff, family members, or community folks. And students that are enrolled in Check and Connect are assigned a monitor who regularly reviews information on attendance, behavior, or academic problems, and then intervenes when problems are identified. That monitor, the adult monitor, also advocates for students, coordinates services, and provides ongoing feedback and encouragement, as well as emphasize the importance of students staying in school. Given my brief description, I want everyone to take an opportunity to fill out on the right under the polling questions if you think that Check and Connect connects to attendance, behavior, and or course performance. On number 1, you'll always be able to select as many as you think apply, and then which tier you think Check and Connect applies to. I'm going to give everyone just a few moments to do that.
And I would say that, remember that interventions can be linked to multiple indicators, like Jenny just said, but that the tiers, we really want to try to narrow that down to a particular tier. Is this really for school-wide, or is this really more directed towards a small group, or that tier 3 where it's an individual program for each student?
All right, we'll give everyone just a few more minutes. I'm hoping we get more people into answering the poll questions really quickly.
We'll give everybody about 20 seconds as it closes up here.
All right, 20 more seconds to put this in, and you're going to have many more opportunities throughout to do this with a few more intervention programs as well. All right, so Sarah, what do we have here in terms of how people voted for Check and Connect?
All right.
Okay. So for Check and Connect, it looks like we have a pretty even connection of which indicators Check and Connect addresses in terms of attendance, behavior, and course performance. And that's spot on. In fact, Check and Connect does connect back to attendance, behavior, and course performance. And then in terms of which tier, because this is considered to be and provides individualized attention and support, we would think about Check and Connect as being a tier 3 individualized attention. I do know of some schools, though, that have also done it in tier 2. Depends on your school size, depends on your capacity, all of these factors. So we've got a number of people that selected tier 3. We have some more that connected or selected tier 2. So that's Check and Connect. We do, in the chat comment, have a link if you want to learn more about Check and Connect. I'm going to hand it over to Sarah, though, to do our next option.
All right, thank you. So the next piece that we're going to be talking about is going to be credit recovery options. I'm going to go ahead and open this poll. It's going to be very similar, I'm sure, of what we just did, to go ahead and try to identify what intervention credit recovery would be helping, which indicators, so attendance, behavior, or course performance, and also, again, the tiers. Is a school-wide issue, or a small group, or an individualized? And I know that that could be different for different places, but I'm sure most of us know what credit recovery options are, but usually they're provided as a student fails a course, doesn't make that credit. We know, especially in the freshman year, that failing just one course can lower a student's probability of graduation in 4 years and with their own cohort. So it's important that those kids are able to make that up. They can do this in a couple of different ways. Usually a lot of schools will have the child be able to take the class again with their peers or with another group of peers. But more and more schools are also offering an online model of credit recovery, or a mixed model where you have online credit recovery and also a teacher there in the room, so a mixed model there. So let's go ahead and give you a couple more seconds here. I'm going to go ahead and start to close the poll up. So about 20 more seconds to answer those two questions. All right. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead and show these results. Maybe, yep. All right, so it looks like everybody pretty much said that this was for course performance, and I would definitely agree with that. This one is pretty specific. there could be evidence of credit recovery courses being able to increase attendance or something like that, perhaps. But primarily, this one is usually directed towards course performance. And then the tiers. Now, this one is kind of tricky. A lot of people said Tier 2. I've had districts that really think of this as a policy. You know, we have the policy of being able to give credit recovery options to students, and so that's more of a Tier 1. But Tier 2 looks like that's primarily what you're seeing, what people have answered here, and I would agree with that as well. So having you know, small groups of students retake classes is out there. And so, Ginny, I'm going to go ahead and give this back to you. Do you want to go ahead and talk about the next one, and then
sure,
maybe we'll go ahead and maybe just do this last one, and then we'll jump to the end. And so
that sounds great. Yep.
Okay.
So another intervention that we've heard a little bit about, and that has also had some research done on it, is called 12 Together. And I've seen this. It's a year-long peer support and mentoring program for early high school students. So generally ninth grade or that first year of high school, depending on your grade organization at your location or state. It's generally focused in after-school discussions, and these discussion groups are led by trained volunteer adults. The peer discussion groups are generally about 12 students, and they are a mix of students that would be considered at risk for high academic failure and others who are at lower academic risk, so it really has this mixed approach. And then these discussions are based off of student interest, usually focusing on personal, family, and social issues. So I'm not sure if others are familiar with 1210, or 12 Together, excuse me, 12 Together, but based off that brief description, think about which early warning indicator or indicators do you think 12 Together might connect to, whether it's attendance, behavior, course performance, or some sort of combination therein. Maybe it's multiple indicators. And then which tier would you think about having 12 Together kind of fit into your tiered framework, whether it's a Tier 1, a Tier 2, or a Tier 3 approach or intervention? And make sure you hit submit once you've provided that information.
And I will say, as we're just kind of letting people finish up this poll, this is why these conversations with the teams are so important, and so that we can really all be on the same page of what interventions we have out there, what are the outcomes that we're expecting students to receive from each of these interventions, and just having these very you know, in-depth conversations about the interventions so that we can later on go back and evaluate and see how well they're working. So I'm going to go ahead and start to close.
Yeah, and while Sarah's publishing that, I'll say, and how you determine who qualifies or who needs these different interventions. Those are important conversations for the team to have. So I know Sarah's publishing the responses right now. Always fun to wait for technology in these moments. All right. So we have some mix here in terms of what people thought for 12 Together in terms of which early warning indicators. Looks like most people said perhaps course performance, which is where I was leaning towards. And other people might say, you know what, these conversations might help get students to school, which is why they selected attendance, or maybe in terms of behavior aspects and reduction of kind of behavior that we're not wanting to see. So I would think a little bit more towards course performance, but the other ones also make sense. In terms of the tiers, it looks like we had a range of people, but mostly people thinking about that Tier 2 approach for that targeted group of students who would participate, and that makes the most sense to me in terms of thinking about 12 Together being a Tier 2 aspect. So we're not going to go through this with the other two interventions that we have selected today, but I do want to just kind of show you the other one that we were going to talk about was reconnecting youth. And then finally this one, homework club, which we know can be really done very uniquely and differently at different locations, and it could be very similar to reassigning homeroom time where students are intentionally assigned to classes with teachers who have content area knowledge where students might be struggling, or not experiencing success in terms of academic course performance, and having that conversation or having supports for students during that time, so rather than just free time, but being really intentional with that time. So had we gone through that and done our voting for the different indicators and tiers, we would have come up with our catalog. So today in our work we discussed most of these, and as we looked at this we said, okay, great, we now have 3 interventions that we think are connected to attendance. We have 1 that we think is connected to behavior, and then we have 5 that are connected to course performance that we said linked back to the early warning indicator of course performance and academic performance. All right, so that's our overall kind of how we've done our cataloging of our interventions. And Sean, later on, one of our later presenters, is going to show the catalog that they've created at their school that talks about this and looks really great. And so you'll see how they've taken that and applied that in their setting. But if we go back to our sample school-level report and our data, do we have the right amount of supports in the right places? So this right here, that second to the left, column was really where we're talking about grading period attendance. But if I go back and look at our attendance, we only have 3 interventions that really connect to attendance. We're not sure about how much the capacity is, but it might be that the capacity of those 3 interventions aren't sufficient to serve 354 students. And that's the number of students that were identified as being at risk for attendance. So again, all of this said, this is a way for us to make sure that we can use our available interventions, know what they are, how they connect back to early warning indicators, particularly if you're doing this in a RTII or PBIS or a multi-tiered system of support meeting, and really make sure that we know what our early warning indicators are, where our students are falling group-wise, and then making sure that we have sufficient capacity and the appropriate interventions to support our students.
Right.
So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Sarah. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Oh, the only other thing I was going to remind people is that if you are flagging, with this attendance indicator, you're flagging more than half of your students or 354 of your students, that would be also a time to really think about some Tier 1 interventions of what we can provide the students as a whole.
Can I take a second and expand on that?
Of course.
So we did get a question about this notion of why should secondary schools really make sure that they're paying attention to that Tier 1? And this data are a great way of really illustrating that. If I, as a school, were going to be working through my students one by one and then providing targeted or intensive interventions at Tier 2, Tier 3, I have 354 students to get through. It's going to take me a long time, and I might likely not have the capacity, the resources, and the time to get through 354. When you have that much or that many students that are getting flagged, that's where really starting to go back and say, I need to pay attention to my Tier 1 becomes really, really helpful. And that's where that's kind of a key flag to me in looking at this data of something that the school would want to make sure that they go back and do.
Thanks, Ginny. And I do want to go ahead and skip that question section. I want to go ahead and introduce our last presenter, who is Sean Hendrickson. Sean Hendrickson has been a principal for 10 years and most recently at the St. Ignatius Middle High School in Montana. When talking to those who have seen him in action, he's really known for his sharp attention to data and using that data to help make decisions to support his students. He's been awarded the first gold standard PBIS school on an Indian reservation, and he's successfully brought 3 different schools to full PBIS implementation and has presented numerous times about early warning system implementation. So Sean, I'm going to go ahead and give this over to you. And so that you can go ahead and start here. All right. There you go. I can hear you now, I think.
Can you hear me now? I sound all right here?
You sound wonderful, Sean.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to be talking about culturally responsive intervention. Like you said, I work on an Indian reservation, and really this is it's doing what's best for kids, despite their background. So most of these things are are universal in nature and can apply to to any situation. This is just a snapshot of where the front of our school and kind of where we live, or where I live and work. Just to give you a little background demographics, we sit on the heart of the Flathead Indian Reservation. Fairly small school, 140 in the high school, 110 kids in the middle school. 65% of our students are native. 65% of our students get free and reduced lunch. We have a high rate of special ed participation, about 21% for those students. On the other side of that, we have a 95 in the 14-15 school year. We had a 95% attendance rate, and we only had 70 discipline referrals, discipline referrals for the entire year. 84% of our kids never received a referral, and 76% of our students participated in extracurricular activities. Last year, that number is actually up this year. So you can see our grad rate. We had a 2.5% dropout rate with an 87.1% cohort grad rate. That's freshmen starting as a freshman, finishing as a senior on time with your classmates. So early warning system, we talk about this. Even though we have a small school where you think everybody knows everybody, the early warning system puts what we already know kind of anecdotally into tangible data. And we've been surprised more than once with this. I just want to talk a little bit about what we have going on in Montana. So they have a push at the state level where they actually pull data out of our student information system and are able to give a percentage, a likelihood of dropping out percentage. And so when we talk about early warning system in Montana, we're actually talking about a system that was created in place. And what that does is it takes grades, credits, discipline, attendance, mobility rate if you've moved from one school to another, if you've been previously retained, if you're a previous dropout, takes all these things and assigns a point value to each one of those, and then actually spits out a percentage. Okay, and so that's kind of how that's one way that we use those early warning system type things. We don't have to actually collect that data. That data is pulled out of our student information system. We use Infinite Campus, similar to like Power School, or I'm trying to think what some other schools would be using. So in doing so, what processes have we put in place? We do a 20-day and a 60-day referral. This is student, or this is teacher generated, and they fill these things out. I'll get down to that. You've been talking heavily about team meetings and the importance of that. What we have is a team of teachers, staff members, which consists of myself, the counselor, 4 teachers, and a paraprofessional. And we meet every Monday and Tuesday during lunch. We do one evening retreat a semester outside of the school environment, and then we have 2 paid work days in the summer. That team functions in a lot of ways. So every Monday, we just strictly deal with PBIS type stuff. Every other Tuesday, we deal with RTI, which is our RTI early warning system, student decision-making team. And then every other Tuesday is student leadership meeting, and that's a team of students. Probably, I think we're at 16 kids, grades 9 through 12, and then 12 grades 6 through 8. And we discuss school culture, climate, just about anything that you could possibly think of that would come up in a school. And that's one thing when they talk about teams. That's a side of things that I would highly recommend, that you have a team of students to, and this is more dealing on the PBIS, MTSS side of things, but it's been a game changer for us as a school. So the 20-day and 60-day referral, teacher-generated, lists reason for at risk. We teachers enter this data into mileposts, which is a recording and information system that we pay a per student fee. It came out of the state of Idaho, but it's moving around Montana, Wyoming, Washington. If you have an opportunity to look at this, it's a great way for an RTI team, for an early warning system team, for PBIS to track interventions, to input all testing data, so you have that on hand at all times. Then once we get a student heading back to the referral process, a student selected, they choose a mentor. We sit down and meet with the family, and we work on what that mentor looks like, what their role and responsibility will be, and how that will function throughout the year. All the while we cross-reference with our early warning system dropout percentage. So we try and make sure that kids aren't missed. We focus on if you have a 10% chance of dropping out to a 45% chance of dropping out. We found anybody between 45 and 99%, we're already doing these interventions and they already have them in place, and we're trying to make sure that these kids don't go that direction. Okay. So here's a look at kind of the referral that goes to the teacher. They check off, they put the name, student, they check off, where they feel this kid is at risk and having problems. And then they make recommended interventions. So they know the kid best. They work with them on a regular basis. We want to make sure and not discount any of their expertise and what they know about this. Somebody talked about anecdotal data in the team meetings. That comes up all the time, but also teacher recommendation as far as what we want to look at and head for. And so this gives a really good outline and basis for a kid when we pull them in, or when we start talking about them in our RTI, early warning system team meetings. So other things that we've put in place to try and help and encourage, and this is more of the culturally responsive. We actually went to the kids and said, on some of these things, and said, what do you feel like would help you be more successful in focusing on certain things? And then wanted to make sure that we didn't burn our staff out. And so if you get assigned, or if a student chooses you to be a mentor, that person gets $40 for their time. The RTI team, they get a $400 stipend for meeting throughout the year. We focused heavily on our after-school tutoring program. We felt like that was going to be one of our areas of biggest gain. And so that's one of our Tier 2 interventions that we've really pushed, and wanted to make sure that program had every opportunity to be successful. And so we purchased Chromebooks, portable printer, every opportunity so kids can come in, be successful, not have to leave the area that we designated. We call it study tables, and we put in incentives for attending. And so the kids outlined what would get them there. So we have gas cards, we have food at local places, we had community places donate things, and we went up 5 days. They showed up 5 days, 10 days, 20 days, 50 days. And since doing this, 16% of our student population is now attending that has never attended, and then attending on a regular basis, which would be more than 2 days a week after school. We only offer it 4 days. We do a Christmas reboot, or a semester reboot, the day before Christmas break, which is, when you look at our intervention, our pyramid of interventions, that's listed as work on work. That's essentially a makeup day. So that's time for them to get caught up. So any assignment they have from that quarter leading up until Christmas, they have the opportunity to turn in, make up work, get caught up for a minimum of half credit, sometimes up to full. That's teacher dependent, but our staff agreed that at least 50% credit on late assignments would happen. I want to say the last time we had close to 200 assignments turned in on that day. So it's been very successful. A lot of grades brought out that's helped get kids back where they need to be. And then after we get back from Christmas break, we do universal expectations, what it looks like to be our universal rules throughout the school. Mentor-mentee meeting, where they set short-term goals for the last 14 days of the semester. So the idea behind this is, say we have a kid who's got a 23% in the class and it's physically impossible for them to pass, and they might have a 55% in the class. They want to sit down, the teacher sit down with that kid, the mentor, and say, you know what, maybe we don't need to focus on this class. We need to really hash out this area so they're at least getting credit in one and not losing in both. And then we compile stats at the end of the year and plan over those summer days for the next year. So our multi-tiered systems of support, our pyramid of interventions, we keep this on hand as a reference during all of our meetings, during our PBIS meetings, during our RTI early warning system. But in doing so, we felt that there was a missing leg, that there was something that we needed to do to add to this, and that was attendance. We felt like it tied into every conversation that we talked about. So we changed and added that to our pyramid. So if you take a look, you can see on the left side it has our academic systems, our Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 interventions. The right side is our behavioral supports, and then the percentages in the pyramid are where we want to be as far as at the end of the year when it's all said and done. So the piece we added was attendance. So those are these are interventions and things that we do within our RTI meetings, within our early warning system meetings. When we talk about a kid, those are options, Tier 2 and Tier 3 options that come into play now when we talk about that. So later on, if you have any questions about this pyramid or what some of those things are, I'll be able to answer that as well. This is a little.
Hey, Sean.
A little tight.
I'm just going to take one minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just going to take 1 minute and say thank everyone for coming. I do want to give you the next 5 minutes to go ahead and finish your presentation. So if people want to stay on and finish listening, that would be wonderful. And then we will be providing the slides for everybody also. And I would encourage everybody to reach out to the presenters if you have specific questions. And so, Sean, go ahead and finish up. But I do want to thank everybody for coming at this point in time. And you'll see a survey at the end as you're leaving about providing us feedback for future webinars as we move forward. But go ahead and finish, Sean.
Yeah. So this is our tracking data. So our tracking sheet. So we have obviously the kid's name is not on here, but you see the EWS percentage. That's early warning system percentage. So if it has say a 34.3, it means that ninth grader identified has a 34.3% chance of dropping out of high school at some point in their 4 years. And so our goal is to lower that number, to start out with a large, with a number and lower that for every kid, have it be lower at the end of the year, start and then eventually, obviously have all those kids graduate. And then we put in the referral that I talked about earlier. We put in that data. Parent meeting frequency is number of times the teacher recommended that student. So if it says 3, that means 3 teachers turned in a form, 3 separate teachers turned in a form for that one kid. Checking off their SPED or 504. And then SEMS is a study hall, science, English, math, social studies. If they have we don't do a traditional study hall, it's more of like a study support, study skills type class. Milepost is their manager, the person who will be responsible for inputting the data into the milepost, which is part of Silverback Learning Solutions. I see that on the questions. and then who their mentor will be, who the person will be meeting with them, and what role they will have. There's more information as we get through the school year that we add to add credits attained, on track for graduation, and attendance numbers as well. This is the when you become a mentor, the tracking piece for that teacher. So, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a teacher. We initially thought, hey, we'll just have teachers, and then we found out students related well with paraprofessionals in the buildings. I think we've had a lunch lady, one of our lunch ladies, be on here for a student, and so we've had to train them on how to go through and talk about this, and then find this information, or to come and get this information. So grade check, any areas of concern, goal setting, days missed, and then we do end of year with, at the bottom you can see in the little box, number of credits attempted, attained, total number of days absent, referrals, and then their final percentage, and then any recommendations or interventions that we may have, or that they may have for that kid. And then looking at our early warning system, embedded into our RTI process. This is kind of a breakdown of data that we sit down and roll through when we have a meeting with the kids. And so, why they're in there, if it's academic or behavior or both, attendance, discipline, grades, and then their early warning system percentage. The first time that they were discussed in the RTI process, and then obviously they get onto our tracking sheet later on, and we're able to track that monthly. And then our tier 2 interventions, if there's 1, 2, sometimes we get into the 3 and 4 with kids, and then tier 3 interventions that are put into place. And then what we're looking at 3/4 of the year in, this is the first year that Montana's had that early warning system percentage, and so this is our baseline data year for that. We've got 46 students that were identified at risk. 20% of those kids have increased. Their early warning system percentage has gone up, and so we're really focusing on those kids, but also 80% of those kids have decreased throughout the year. And so the things that we've put in place are we're really seeing dividends on that. 28 students are credit deficient in the entire school, and that could include 1 or more classes. 49% of students made honor roll for first quarters. We were pretty excited about that number, and we've only had 2 kids drop out of school this year. And we had 93% of our parent-teacher student-led conferences, which is exciting to see and have, and we survey parents during that time as well, and we get a lot of information from that. And right now we're looking at ways to use the early warning system data in the middle school grades, so 6, 7, and 8, because we can get a percentage from that through the data that we submit. We're just trying to figure out how to best use that and how to transfer that from middle to high school. So additional research-based decisions that we've used based on early warning signs to prevent dropout, increase graduation rates. We do in the 8th grade freshman orientation, where parent-student night in the spring. So that's actually coming up here in the next month, and the kids schedule their classes, and then parents come in that evening, and we really sit down and meet with them and lay out what their freshman year looks like and the expectations. And then when they come back, we do what's called a freshman jump start. The first 3 days of school of activities, we really set them up to be successful in high school. We're always looking at changing that. I think in the future we're going to head to a full day, like our opening day will only be freshmen and new students, and really try to do a full orientation. We eliminated opening day rules, so we talk positive. We don't talk about, like, I don't get up as principal and talk about you know, if you're truant, this is what's going to happen, and these are the consequences for this. We only talk about programs that we have going on, keeping things really positive, and that's really taken a tone as far as really getting kids excited and on the right foot as far as school goes in the school year. For our later in life college application night for seniors, we get application waivers for in-state schools. So for students who can't afford or say that money is an option or a problem or you know, any kind of obstacle, we try and get out of there. And so we'll get universities to waiver those application fees, and we really hype it up and make a night of it and get parents and students in and applying to schools and really getting excited about it. FAFSA night, we get a local rep from the university to sit down with parents. This year we had 60% filled out by March 1st. We're actually in the mid-70% now, so about 75% of our students have filled out the FAFSA. And then previous years it was 34% by that March 1st date. And then we're doing a career day, college transition day. So what that looks like is we're actually taking kids to schools that they're going to. So in the next 3 weeks, seniors who've said, okay, I'm going to the University of Montana or Montana State University, we have an adult taking them down on a personalized tour to really get to know those schools and what's going on there, so they're really ready for that transition, and hopefully they can stick around past that 1-year mark of school and really get them there. Kids who are going into the military, we bring in the military. Kids who say that they're going to work, we bring in the local job service, and they sit down with those kids in an intensive, like, full day. You know, this is what you need to do. They look over their resumes. They put forth jobs. They show the process. They show how to get in touch with those. So transitioning on multiple levels, not just coming into high school, not just during high school, but also leaving high school. So these are all things that we've input that we're seeing huge dividends with. That concludes my portion.
Thank you, Sean. I really appreciate that. I know that there's been questions about, you know, how do we deal with data, or why do we even need early warning systems when we're a rural area or a small community? And I think that you've illustrated the importance of being able to use data to look at kids proactively. And like you said, you've been surprised a couple of times. And then really the stuff that you guys have put in place is really just phenomenal, and so I appreciate you sharing that with us. I also want to thank everybody who's continued to stay on with us for the end of this presentation. I'm very sorry that we don't have time for more questions, but right here we do have everybody's email address. If there's somebody that you really want to reach back out to and ask some questions, everybody has said that they're open to providing a little bit more information for you. So I also encourage you to look at the IES website, and we'll be sending that out soon with the other list of webinars and things that are going on coming up. And so hopefully if you didn't get your question answered this time, you'll use this time to provide a little bit of feedback about what else you want to learn about over the coming year in this learning series on early warning systems sponsored by IES. Thank you, and have a wonderful day and a good weekend coming up, and we'll hopefully talk to you soon.